you very much and welcome, Riane Eisler. You are in my heart and in many thousands of women in Latin America's heart because of all your initiatives and ideas and philosophies and thoughts and historic background are really embedded in everything we do. And so Riane is a social systems scientist, cultural historian, futurist, attorney who research, writings, and speaking have transformed the lives of millions of people. And I can tell you millions because it's happened. She started all this 40 years ago, and step by step, she keeps invading everybody's mind and opening everybody's heart to what is the truth of how people, the economies, and women's rights have to be taken in consideration. Her newest book, Nurture Our Humanity, and how domination and partnership shapes our brain, lives, and future, is an amazing book as well on how neuroscience is affecting the changes in our culture. And today we are going to talk about her very special book, The Chalice and the Blade, that has been translated in more than 57, practically now maybe 60 languages now, and it's already more than 30-40 years old, and it's an amazing book on the truth of how women's rights should be taken into consideration. She is the president of the Center for Partnership Systems, dedicated to research and education on specific issues about the domination and partnership societies and how we can change the world to a better place. And maybe we can start, Riane, if you want to tell us a little bit about your background of how did you start this in such an early age, writing about these incredibly truthful things that today are as valid as 40, 50 years ago when you started?
Well, you're right. The Chalice and the Blade first came out in 1987, before some of our listeners were born. But it is still as relevant today, if not more so, because I think I've always been ahead of my time and the times are catching up. And this, it is now in a new translation in Spanish, Chalice the Blade. And what can I tell you? I really started my research, and this is the first book that reports it. I have a lot of passion for it. And I started it to try to answer some of the questions that arose in my childhood as a child refugee with my parents from Nazi Vienna, where I was born. And, you know, these were very traumatic experiences for me. But at the same time, they led me to questions about whether it really has to be this way. I mean, we're told that it's just human nature, right? That we're just bad, you know, whether it's selfish genes or whether it's original sin, it's the same story. We're bad, we have to be controlled from the top. And that's a very convenient story for maintaining and imposing domination systems. And it happens to be a false story. It is simply not true. And if you read Chalice the Blade, Chalice and the Blade, and there is more evidence now, by the way, even from DNA studies, that verifies everything that is in the Chalice and the Blade, that in fact, that caveman cartoon, you know, where with one hand he's got a club, a weapon, and with the other hand he's dragging a woman by the hair, right? Telling us what, you know, that injustice, violence, male dominance, that's just how it's always been, and by implication always will be, is simply false. So I will stop now. Through my life, in my work, and this I have to tell you is a very different approach to the study of society that does not ignore or marginalize the majority of humanity, women and children. And once we do that, we see patterns, and I called one the domination system and the other one the partnership system, or rather the partnership domination social scale, because it's always a matter of degree. And yes, the status of women, which we have been taught is just a women's issue, right? Happens to be a key social issue. That it is not coincidental that whether it was Hitler in Nazi Germany or Stalin in the former Soviet Union or Khomeini's Iran or the Taliban or ISIS or the rightist fundamentalist alliance, that a top priority for them is the subordination of women. And it goes with an authoritarian, violent domination system.
And goes beyond the patriarchy idea of how religions have really dominated everything as well.
Well, I wrote an article recently for a journal called Cosmos, Kosmos, and I highly recommend it. And by the way, if you want, a lot of resources are on our website, which is centerforpartnership.org. And you can find the Cosmos article, which is about really sorting out the grain from the chaff, sorting out the domination systems and leaving them behind, these teachings that arose in the course of domination history from the core of all the world's religions, which are partnership teachings, if you will, feminine teachings of caring, of compassion, of nonviolence. And we must do this, and it's very important that we also get our religious leaders who are open-minded to not be passive, to do this, to really say that this is something that we must do, is to sort our religious teachings using the partnership domination social scale.
Yeah, you see, Riane, what I find fascinating is that in 1838, long time ago, 200 religious institutions got together in this very big congress and decided that there was one thing they had in common, all the religions, as the ethics of respect and the ethics of care. And
Yes.
still, after all these years since then, really religions have not taken any action to say religions have the same purpose. Why is it that this is happening, and the idea of the caring society, of domination and partnership societies are not being addressed by these religious institutions?
Well, I think you know the answer. It is that these institutions have really come out of domination times. And so at the same time that they talk about love and about caring and about nonviolence, in reality, the scriptures themselves in the course of domination history, I mean, what we know today is that about 5,000 years ago, more or less, there was a shift from a more partnership orientation to a domination orientation in the mainstream of I've studied Western civilization a lot because so many of the excavations until now have been around the Mediterranean, the West. But it seems to have happened at different times and different periods all over the world. And by the way, all of this is already in the Chalice and the Blade, in Chalice y Espada. So when you say, why haven't they? They must, but they haven't had the template of the partnership domination scale. And once you use that, you can very easily sort these. And if you look at the Dartmouth Bible, which is a scholarly Bible, which is annotated, you see that so many of these teachings were later teachings, like there's 2 stories in Genesis about human creation. One is, of course, the very well-known Adam and Eve story, right? And Eve is blamed, like Pandora, right, for all of our problems. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But then there's another story where Eve, the woman, is not just whipped out as an afterthought out of a man's rib. It's the Elohim story, and it's an earlier story where we are created in the image of the divine. Elohim is plural, actually, of God, goddess. And so this is what I mean by sorting the various stories, the various teachings. It's like being a Sherlock Holmes, but doing it with our history. And I want to return to the Adam and Eve story, because when I was a child, I always wanted to know, it says in the Bible that henceforth, in other words, from now on, woman will be subservient to men. And I always wanted to know, well, what was it like before the henceforth? And nobody wanted to talk about that. And I also wanted to know, why would women ask advice from a snake? I mean, we don't usually do that. But if you do the research, if you read the research that started really with the first book reporting it was the Chalice and the Blade, you see that the snake was a symbol of oracular prophecy. Even the Oracle of Delphi in historic times, it was a priestess, a woman, working with a python, they were called pythonesses, with a snake, putting herself into an oracular trance. And she was the Oracle of Delphi. So no wonder the old reality, it made a lot of sense for a woman to ask advice, so to speak, from a snake. But the new reality, of course, is the commandment that you shall not think for yourself. You shall not seek knowledge for yourself. You may only think, never mind do. You may only think as I tell you to do, which is what Yahweh says. That's the new domination reality. And it is based on fear, as in the term God-fearing, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, everything you said, I think every sentence you said, there's a question I would ask. But let's start a little bit earlier with the fact that Adam, the mistold history of Adam and Eve, that is an archetype, but it's an archetype that has been repeated in many other in other myths, in other civilizations. But basically, according to what we have studied with Teresa, who's here on the line, that Eve was born from the
Rib.
rib from the man. She was born with earth from God in the similar way, and her name, according to all the books I've read, is called Lilith. No, and basically that shows that there's a lot of misinterpretations on how history is being told. It seems that history keeps being changed and changed and changed according to the patriarchic needs of the time. And so, coming to today, it's happening again in Afghanistan now, for example. What is it that creates that need for men to actually need that to be superior through power, that gives them this sense of accomplishment and domination? Is it part of a DNA that men had certain DNAs that we don't have? Is it part of just culture, and this means that it can be changed faster than it is DNA? Give us some guidance,
All right.
please.
Well, my newest book, as you know, is called Nurturing Our Humanity. It came out with Oxford University Press about a year and a half ago, and it draws very heavily from neuroscience. And what we today know is that our brains develop in interaction with our environment, which for humans, of course, are largely cultural environments, right? I mean, it isn't just the table and the chair that's a human creation, it's our cultures that are human creations. Now, men and women actually both are susceptible to the domination indoctrination. But of course, since men are in that indoctrination privileged, today we talk about toxic masculinity, right? Or male entitlement as something that men are taught. So it is, women find it probably easier, even if they were brought up with that kind of mindset, to leave it behind. And this really is not an issue of women against men or men against women. It's an issue of freeing both women and men, both boys and girls and everybody in between, from our rigid gender stereotypes, okay? So let me talk a little bit about what we know about brain development, and hence, of course, how we think, how we feel, yes, how we act, including how we vote. In Nurturing Our Humanity, and in the epilogue, by the way, of the Chalice and the Blade that I wrote for the 30th anniversary, which I think is part of the Spanish translation, I note that Trump, the people who voted for Trump, it was not that they were economically disadvantaged. I mean, that's a mythology. The two studies that really we need to pay attention to. One is a study showing that people who voted for Trump are stuck in rigid gender stereotypes. They really, really believe that men, starting with a male god, of course, are supposed to rule, to dominate. Secondly, and this is fascinating, and I'll elaborate on it a little, in terms of parenting now, there's a big difference. They tend to not be interested in encouraging children's curiosity or children's resilience or children's capacity to adjust to the new. No, their main concern is what they call respect. Sometimes, of course, they mean fear, because in domination systems, respect has to go both ways, you know. It's fear and obedience, and yes, and just acceptance. So why is that the case? Well, culture is mediated through a variety of social institutions, starting with the family. And the partnership domination social scale takes family into account. If you look at most studies of society, they do not, because they either marginalize or just ignore the majority of humanity, women and children, and with it, of course, family, right? But what we know today from neuroscience is that what children experience or observe in their early years, especially 1 to 5, has a tremendous impact on nothing less than the structure of the brain. And so this is familiar. They will vote for the strongman leader, and they will go into denial because the authority figure in their lives tells them that it's not the fault of, I mean, look, climate change denial, pandemic COVID-19 denial, election result denial. Denial is built into that brain. And for those of you who really want the details, I suggest that read Nurturing Our Humanity, because it is the last in a long series of several books. I mean, first came Chalice, then came Sacred Pleasure, which looks at sexuality and spirituality, which is a book I love. And that really prefigures a lot of what came later, just as Chalice does. And of course, my book on economics, The Real Wealth of Nations, but Nurturing Our Humanity relies very heavily on neuroscience. So to answer your question, Laura, it may very well be that a small minority of people are born with a predisposition to domination, but we also know that in general, it's so fascinating. Studies of brain function show that the so-called pleasure centers in our brains light up more when we share and care than when we win and dominate. But the rewards of our economic system, of our social system, are still for domination, aren't they? And that makes a huge difference. And Laura, we can't hear you.
Yes, that is something that is so true, that our reward system is all based on domination, fear, violence, and disconnection, because the more rigid our brains are, the more domination there is in just a small group of powerful people. Nowadays we know that the difference between the rich and the poor is getting wider and wider and wider, and this means that there's a parallel between the emperor, the king that had all the power from God, to the now small group of extremely billionaires, that are a handful, that decide for all the humanity at this point. So
absolutely. And I think that what we're talking about is not capitalism, it is domination economics. I mean, I really want to emphasize this, because the nations that have moved more to the partnership side have a very healthy market economy. I'm talking about nations like Finland, which women are really very important in terms of government leadership there. And as the status of women rises, why would the status of women be so important? Well, because with the low status of women comes what I've called a gendered system of values, in which anything stereotypically in domination system associated with the soft or the feminine is devalued. And this is what we're trying to change. And groups like this are so important. In my book, The Real Wealth of Nations, I introduce um, two concepts. One is that we really have to stop arguing about capitalism and socialism because both Smith and Marx were stuck in devaluing the work of care, okay, whether it's for people or for nature, that we have to move to what I've called a caring economics of partnerism. But I also introduced the concept of human infrastructure, natural infrastructure, human infrastructure, community infrastructure, which are ignored in conventional economic theory, whether it's socialist or capitalist. I mean, we've really have so in the Chalice and the Blade, in Chalice the Blade, I have two chapters called Reality Stood on Its Head. And it's about the remissing, you know, what Laura talked about. And it's up to us to really get the truth out. So I leave it to you to do this. And you have these books which have the evidence from a variety of disciplines: archaeology, anthropology, um, linguistics, DNA studies, mythology, myths. So many earlier myths have clues, like I just said, to this earlier reality, more partnership-oriented reality, not ideal, but far less violent and far more equitable and not male dominant.
Yeah, Riane, you're so right with this, and you know that in the world economic world, the Forum of World Economics, they have these gender studies every year, and they say that now there's than 260 years before there's gender equality in the world, and so basically, my grandchildren might see some equality, but COVID has really put a slam on any progress we have done up to now because of all the rigidity and the control governments have decided to have over their citizens. So on that note, how do you think with 5,000 years of or more of where we have these stereotypes that are practically in our DNA, uh, women and men, uh, and we need to move on a faster base to change this because we don't want our grandchildren to see some equality and see partnership societies. So how can we bring forward what actions have you done in the last few years that have helped thousands of women to realize a better path? And what going forward, what would you suggest for this group to do?
Well, as you know, I have proposed in my work 4 cornerstones that we must really pay attention to. If bear with me for a moment because I'm going to backtrack. If you look at modern history from the perspective of the partnership and domination configuration, never mind right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, because they really marginalize us. And also, there have been repressive, violent regimes in every one of these conventional categories. So none of us tell us what we have to build, right, in order to move forward. But if you look at the last 300 years, you see that as the Industrial Revolution has gained momentum, and there has been more and more social and economic, technological dislocation, you have had one social movement after another challenging the same thing, a tradition of domination. I mean, think about it for a moment, because we don't have to start from square one. The so-called Enlightenment rights of men movement challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule, right? The feminist and then the women's rights movement challenged, again, another so-called divinely ordained right, the right of men to rule over the women and children in the, quote, castles, you know, of their homes, you know, a military metaphor. The abolitionists and the anti-colonial, the civil rights, the Me Too movement today, they're challenging another so-called divinely ordained tradition of domination, the so-called divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule over inferior ones. You take it all the way to the environmental movement. It is challenging the the so-called, once hallowed conquest and domination of nature, which at our level of technological development and population could take us, our species, to an evolutionary dead end. But all of these movements have primarily focused on dismantling the top of the domination pyramid. Politics and economics as conventionally defined. And they've left pretty much in place the four cornerstones, the foundations, on which domination systems keep rebuilding themselves. And I've identified four cornerstones. One is childhood, for the reasons that I just mentioned. Now, there are trends today towards away from domination parenting to partnership parenting. The American Psychological Association, for example, finally came out last year and said spanking, hitting a child, is not only ineffective as a means of achieving and, whatever you were supposed to achieve, but that it is harmful, not only psychologically, physically, in every way. And we have, in terms of resources, on our website at centerforpartnership.org, in both English and Spanish, a very short, caring, and connected parenting guide. So that's a resource that you can share with everyone. Gender. I've already spoken a lot about gender, but we are seeing movement towards understanding that we must pay much more attention to gender. I mean, Laura, you were right. COVID-19 pushed us back. So many women do most of the care work, of course, for free, in families mostly, or for very, very low wages in the market. And that is part of domination economics. So we at the Center for Partnership Systems are developing new metrics, new measures of what is and is not economically valuable, showing the enormous economic value of the work of caring for people starting at birth and of caring for our natural life support systems. And you can find out about what's happening now. We started with 24 indicators, social wealth economic indicators, launched in 2014. And a team of economists is now working on updating and condensing them into an index. Why? But 24 indicators are too much, right? We need one or two numbers. But what they show...
These indicators you are sponsoring to replace the current GDP calculations, is that?
Because GDP is crazy. I mean, think about it for a moment. GDP follows the socialist and capitalist model of economics, which classifies the work of caring for people starting at birth and caring for nature as reproductive rather than productive, right? So GDP only includes as, quote, productive, as health, economically healthy, the goods and services in a monetized economy that pass hands, okay? But what does it include as productive work? It actually includes, if you look at GDP, it's fascinating. It includes activities that actually harm and take life. Selling cigarettes, selling unhealthy fast foods. Not only is that included, but so also tremendously good for GDP are the medical costs. They're all caused by this, the funeral costs caused by this. At the same time, GDP does not include as productive work the work that parents, mostly mothers still, do for free in homes. Until we change, and that's part of the gendered system of values that both socialism and capitalism perpetuate. So don't let yourself be caught in this ridiculous diversion. It is a way of fragmenting our consciousness to argue about capitalism versus socialism. Of course, we need, COVID showed, we need both markets. We don't happen to have a free one. It would be nice to have one. And government policies, but what kinds of markets, what kinds of rules, what kinds of rewards, that's the issue, okay? And story is as, and language. I cannot tell you how important it is. First of all, language. Linguistic psychologists have long told us something that we really need to pay attention to, which is that the categories provided by our language channel our thinking, so that it's almost impossible to see another alternative. I mean, think about right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western. They don't include what happens to women, right? Or what happens to children. And the only categories that our language has that are gender specific are matriarchy and patriarchy. So either mother's rule or father's rule. There is no partnership alternative. I mean, think about that. We have to change our language, and that's where the domination system and the partnership system are so important. But there's also story, and as I've already said, so many of the stories we've told about economics, about what is and is not valuable, about our past, what really happened in our past, and with it, what are the human possibilities? It's false. So it starts with changes in consciousness. It really does. And spreading this new information. But it also, I urge you to use what resources not only we have developed, but others are developing. But certainly the Caring and Connected Parenting Guide, the social wealth, economic indicators, and now in process, the social wealth index. These are very, very important tools, and we have to get people not only on the grassroots, but in positions of power and control of resources to have them understand that all their rank and privilege, it's a first-class cabin in a sinking ship.
Fascinating what you say, because one of the four pillars that you're mentioning is also the issue of regulations, of how governments deal with issues. And in the last few years, we had really very interesting legislation that was that, for example, in European or India or some New Zealand, they expect that public companies have at least 2 or 3 women in the boards. as well as in Ecuador. I don't know if other countries have established that if you run for president, one of the candidates of the two have to be a female. Uh, these changes, I know now they seem heavy and not effective, but they do change the narrative of things. And unfortunately, it goes too slowly, but at least it's happening, and
Yes,
we need to accelerate it.
absolutely. And it really, I think it's up to us enlightened women and some enlightened men, really, to change the narrative. And the information is there.
No, it's fascinating. And when in the Wealth of Nations, you talk about the caring economy in a beautiful way. And where did this come? Where was your experience that brought you to that to the caring economy as such? Because you were the first one who coined this term,
I did.
and we are so grateful for that, because Women for Solution is all about bringing forward the caring economy. We have this, as I mentioned, this courses on gender parity towards a more caring economy, and we have maybe 80 to 300 women registered each course we do,
It's
and it's
wonderful.
fantastic.
But let me first say that The Wealth of Nations was Adam Smith. I wrote a book called The Real Wealth of Nations.
Yeah, the
Okay.
yes.
Um, I think that we have the blueprints, we have the information. The issue is to get it enacted into laws, and but it doesn't. Laws are very important. Regulations are very, very important, because they are part of changing consciousness and part of changing the reward system. Education. We are being indoctrinated, and this is tragic, really. Our universities are really replicating as important knowledge and truth the exclusion of women, children, and the real story of our past and present, and the possibilities for our future. And I want to alert you all, and please, I think I sent the information to you, Laura, but if I haven't, I will. A university, an accredited university in the United States, Meridian University, is starting in December offering a PhD and a master's or a master's degree in a partnership concentration, a concentration based on my work for partnership practitioners. And not only are they offering a degree program, and by the way, they are very helpful in terms of government funding for that, of loans such as they are. But they're also in September this month, very shortly, there will be a course that's also open to the public, not only to graduate students. And I highly recommend it. And of course, I'll be teaching in both of these. So I really urge you to tell your friends, tell your kids, tell everybody that you know about this opportunity to, not just in bits and pieces, but in a coherent way. And I will send you, Laura, the links to both.
I'll be number one to register to these PhDs, because I'm always looking forward to studying these things in a
Great,
systematic way.
great. Well, I will make a note right now to send it to you, and then you can spread it immediately far and wide. Okay,
Absolutely. And then we most probably what we can do is try to bring everything that we learn in this course in Spanish, and together with Teresa, we can actually spread it in Spanish Latin American world, where there's a lot of need of inspiring women to a more partnership society. And we truly, what we do with these courses, we really inspire women to actually get convinced from their heart, from their essence. Because if you're convinced, you emanate this energy that what you say, who you are as a woman, who what your beliefs are true, and they should be respected. And
Absolutely.
so and so I think that is so important to move this along in all of Latin America, that is in such need of change, because Latin American women have the best predisposition. They're so full of positivity, but they are still in an incredibly strongly machista, as we call it, a patriarchal society that doesn't allow them to break that glass ceiling.
Look, I think it has changed once before. It can change again. And this is what we have to keep in mind. I think that it reaches a certain point where it tips, okay? And that is, I think, what we really have to remember. And I know that it's going so slowly. I just put the link to the PhD program into the chat. And then I will also put into the chat, excuse me, the link to the course. They're two different things. The course is called Reimagining Power and Revaluing Care. And as I said, it's open to the general public, and it starts almost immediately. So I'll put that one in next. And
Is
you
it
can,
are you sending it to me by in my chat or
I
in
put it
my?
in your chat right now. I'm putting it
Okay.
right now
Because
in the chat.
also there is a very strong need to do exactly this in Arabic too. We have
Oh,
a
in
few
Arabic,
friends.
I would love to see it in
We have
Arabic.
here LB, who I don't know who she
Oh,
is.
oh, that's
Uh,
me, Subna.
Oh, my dear, I was thinking because I couldn't see, I knew you were in, but then I didn't see you anymore. So our friend Lubna is fluent in Arabic, and as well Viola Edwards. And
That's
so
right.
we are all training each other with all our knowledge and different informations. And so we're looking for that. I would like to open now the call to also any questions anybody of you who heard this presentation. It was miraculous, inspiring, and full of suggestions, books, and links to further our knowledge. To ask any questions you want to reconfirm, maybe Teresa, you have some things you want to clarify, because Teresa has been is very knowledgeable about these changes of the issues about Eve and Lilith, and how the concilio of concilio of Tenea, or what was it, the concilio of that created the change of uh, in the Catholic religion on the what was Eve and Lilith. No, you're muted, Teresa.
Well, um, the only thing I would like to know, if I contact you to ask you in the future, near future, anything about the book whenever I'm reading it to the women.
I'd be very happy, of course. Please, Laura knows my email, and you can get in touch with me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because when I read to women and they ask questions, they ask back questions, then it will be wonderful to have not only Laura, but also you to share the best answers possible.
I'd be very happy to be of help to you. You know, I'm obviously quite busy, but this work that you're doing is what we so need. So
I think
please,
so.
get in touch, and I will also email these two links. And by the way, these are online classes. The class that's starting now in 6 days, I think it's starting, the Reimagining Power and Valuing Care, that is completely online. And I think the degree program is primarily online. So, and now with COVID, of course, it may all be, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? We really don't know, do we, about COVID? I think it's going to be with us for a while. So a lot more is going to happen. And we have to learn how to really use online more and more and more.
Well, you see, Rainey, I have always read to women, but I have always gathered them in a place. And with the pandemic, I learned to do these readings online, well, through WhatsApp. And now I'm reading to women who are in Australia or Hong Kong or Ireland. And I think this pandemic has pushed us to connect with people all over the world in ways that we have never imagined. So I'm somehow grateful for the good part of what pandemia has brought us.
I agree with you. It's an opportunity. Well, I think many people are reevaluating the status quo and saying, but it's up to us to know that there is an alternative, and it isn't matriarchy, and it isn't socialism. It is partnership, partnerism, an economics of partnerism, and a partnership configuration in which the family and gender and a new economics and different stories and language are the cornerstones that we have to really spread. I think that we certainly need to work on having new rules for corporations.
Totally
And
agree.
I think that the idea of having a minimum tax that is global is very important. That's a partnership trend that we need to support. But you know, there are a lot of people who are brainwashed. I mean, you know that in Nurturing Our Humanity, I had a lot of studies from neuroscience, and one of them is that people who are brought up in domination cultures or subcultures, actually the part of their brain that is designed to help us respond in an appropriate way to change is smaller and slower. They eventually get there, but it takes them much longer. And since they are conditioned to follow the leader, okay, they can get really stuck. And that happened to, I mean, it's really, we're seeing it writ large today, that so much of the world has been conditioned to prefer an authoritarian, male-dominated, violent system. And so we have to work on these cornerstones aside from everything else.
Riane, you're touching on something that is so dear to me, is the fact that, you know, when in a family or in an environment or culture, there are some people that are more valuable than others.
That's right.
It means that these domination societies are really encouraging that type of valueless or valuable type of people in the same environment. But what you mentioned in your book, and something that I would love you to expand on, is you mentioned the fact that when these people in a domination society, where they see and experience at a very young age children, people that are more valuable than others, maybe the father is the one who makes the decisions, or is the presidents that can do horrible things, doesn't matter. And the issue is that you mentioned is that these people, whenever they they are in presence, or they hear, or they are in knowledge of injustice created by these authorities, they have difficulty reacting. Is
That's
this
right.
what you mentioned, that is the part of the brain that is a that seeks justice is smaller, is less developed?
Well, I don't know that. I think what happens in the domination shaped brain is either the suppression or compartmentalization to only the in group of empathy. I don't think that the brain is less developed in terms of uh, uh, appropriately responding to change, like climate change or COVID, okay? Um, we're just really learning about the human brain and how it is really formed in interaction with this early environment. But the good news is we can change. Even these people whose brain, in terms of, for example, there was an experiment of people hitting a certain letter. And when they changed the letter, they had a really hard time doing the changed one. It was fascinating. I think it was a W to an M or an M to a W. They were sort of, confused, but eventually they did change. So, and consider one thing too. This is why religious leaders, we have to get our religious leaders to speak up, as you said, to talk about the fact that historically, what has been added to our so-called sacred scriptures, a lot of it is the product of domination systems.
Yes.
And we have to sort it out. So
True.
if we could get together some leaders in, quote, progressive religions to really have the courage to do this, it would make such a difference.
Laura, there is a question in the chat.
Oh.
I can't hear you. What?
Oh, yeah, there's a question. It says by Viola, excellent conference. I would like to know if you think that men understand our message of need on gender parity, our needs as women to be the parity. Do you feel that the journey of men in general is towards understanding our needs today?
Well, I think it's not, first of all men. I mean, we know that some men are very empathic, some men are very caring, and some men do understand. But the man who is socialized for domination masculinity, for him, it is God's will or nature's will that he dominate. And so that's it. I mean, he's been indoctrinated to believe that this is what's right, what's moral. So I think that a lot of men really don't understand. And there's all this propaganda, about the war of the sexes. It's part of the domination system. I mean, when people are controlled, they tend to manipulate. So women learn to manipulate. I mean, what else are they going to do? I mean, you certainly can't assert yourself or you'll get killed, right? In the Taliban or whatever it is, in a rigid domination system. I mean, the whole thing is such a mess. What we have to show these men are the advantages of partnership for them. And really, domination systems have been a disaster for so many men who have had to give their lives just because some guy on top wanted more real estate. I mean, think about that historically. I mean, it's a crazy system.
More real estate, you're right. Just plain more real estate.
That's right. That's what it's been about. And I see that there is also another message about that it also applies to women who've bought this, who have really, really, you know,
adopted
this as God's will or nature's will or
husband's will.
Whatever, you know. I mean, so yeah, I mean, but the good news is that it is I mean, there's a Me Too movement, right? There's a young feminist movement. There is change in the air, but we have to understand that we must pay attention to these four cornerstones.
Can you repeat the four cornerstones? So everyone's is education or childhood education?
It's childhood, and really it has a lot to do with the parenting, the structure of the family. You know, when you said children in a rigidly male-dominated family or in a family that is headed by a woman, but that still accepts the normative ideal of these gender stereotypes, okay? What do children learn? That one kind of difference, you know, like the difference between in form, you know, between female and male, right? That the male form is more valuable than the female form. And then if there are rigid gender stereotypes, of course, then you also get that anything that is stereotypically considered masculine, domination, violence, that's more important. So there's always money for prisons, you know, the punitive male head of household, right? Or for weapons and wars, hero as killer. But somehow there isn't enough money for the quote soft, the feminine, for caring for children, for caring for people's health. I mean, you really have to use the lens of these two systems and understand why gender is such an important piece.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I'm totally. I can't wait to be part of this PhD program and from the Meridian University, and to keep rereading all your books again. I've read them and I reread them, and I think I'm going to reread them again and reintroduce a few other concepts that are so fundamental. And I think that we are about to close. However, there's a few more questions that are coming up that maybe you have some short answers to them. One is we need to begin by practicing partnerism within the growing sphere of our influence. And so, how a partnerism, I guess, starts in families, and how, I guess, you gave us some. You're gonna, and I will send all the links to these from your website, so people can start going there. And then the other question is the family is the unit of change without a doubt. Is it evident that the generations that are coming have other visions on family?
Some do and some don't, by the way. I mean, look at all the young men who stormed the Capitol, right? But there were also women. You know, I mean, so I think that it's important that we show men and women the benefits of the partnership configuration. And that's what my books really do again and again, don't they?
Again and again, they have incredible knowledge and vision. So on that note, I don't know if there's any other questions. Otherwise, we're gonna close and maybe have another visit with Riane in another webinar. Your webinars are very successful with us because they are after they're looked in the recorded version in many ways. So we will, by many women and men. So on this, I have to thank you deeply, Riane, that you're here with us and sharing these amazing concepts and your vision for the last 40 years and how you've done all these changes with people slowly but surely. I'm sure millions and billions are seeing your change. And I wouldn't doubt that maybe sooner than later you will be found in the list of Nobel Peace Prize ideas for change, because what you're promoting is there's not too many out there who are doing this, who are having this very brilliant and razor focus idea of how the changes can be done through understanding clearly what is a domination society versus a partnerism society, because these systems really tell the story, not capitalism, communism, or socialism. And on that note,
I rely on all of you, Laura, and everyone in this group, because it's not enough. I mean, I have provided some of the frame, some of the evidence, but now it's up to you.